Good morning, greetings, good evening, and thank you for joining us. It's such a joy that you will be able to join with us today, and we are so grateful. We have interpretation both in French and Portuguese. As Andrew suggested, make sure that you click your language. Welcome, welcome, and welcome. And let's have a word of prayer before you start this meeting. Heavenly Master, we are so grateful for the time that you've given to us, Lord. Lord, thank you for giving us an opportunity to do your work in your ministry in the area of finance, Lord. As we listen to this information, Lord, be with us. Give us an open mind, open heart, so that we can understand and do your ministry according to your will, Lord. Be with us right through. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick King with the General Counsel on Finance and Administration. And we're going to start out with just kind of an overview of the general church budget. The United Methodist Church budget is made up of 7 funds: Africa University, the Black College Fund, the Episcopal Fund, the General Administration Fund, the Interdenominational Cooperation Fund, Ministerial Education Fund, and the World Service Fund. The central conferences contribute to both the Episcopal Fund and the General Administration Funds as part of their apportionments. And we will go into each of these funds in more detail later. Currently, in the jurisdictions, the proposed budget is $347 million. That's a 43% reduction. The base rate, which is the rate of apportionments, is 2.595% of local church expenditures. This is a 21% lower rate of apportionment than we've currently been using. In the central conferences, the proposed budget is $6.1 million, and that is a 10% reduction. The estimated apportionments per member is 24 cents across all central conferences. So why are we decreasing the budget? There's several factors that we've been facing over the years. Worship attendance in the U.S. has been declining for many years, and it's been even prior to the pandemic and prior to disaffiliation. We had been seeing increasing rates of decline in the worship attendance. COVID-19 obviously had a further impact on both attendance and in collections. In the U.S., close to 30% of the churches have closed by disaffiliation or other means since 2019. That's a very significant number. And when you look at the giving, the overall giving at the local churches, that represents about 25% of the total offerings to our local churches in the U.S. Now we're going to go into a little bit more details about each of the funds that are apportioned. Africa University. This fund supports Africa University in Zimbabwe, and it supports the education efforts for people within the African continent. It is receiving a 48% decline from the current budget in the ADCA. This is also a further decline from what is printed in the current version that you have of the ADCA, and total funding for the quadrennium is right at $4.9 million. And this shows you in terms of dollars of each of the periods of time. Column A represents the last budget that was approved by General Conference. It is $9.4 million. The amount that's currently printed in your ADCA that was submitted last August is $5.4 million, and then you see the number that we're currently going to update in the DCA, in the Daily Christian Advocate on the first day of General Conference, will be $4.9 million. The Black College Fund. The Black College Fund, it supports 11 historically Black church-affiliated schools in the United States. This fund has also seen a recommendation of a decline of 48%. And again, it is 9% lower than what's in that you currently have in your ADCA. The revised funding will be right at $21.1 million. So this chart also, again, column A is what's currently last approved by General Conference in 2016. If you look at column B, those are the numbers that are currently in the ADCA. And again, column D is the amount of funding that's being proposed in the current budget. So you see, again, 48% decline overall from the current budget we're operating under. The General Administration Fund. This fund, it supports many activities. It supports the primary cost of this fund is General Conference, and that's also one of the reasons that the central conferences also contribute to this fund, is to support General Conference, the Judicial Council, the Commission on Archives and History, and GCFA. This fund has seen a 27.5% reduction from the current budget, and it's a 12% decrease from what was published in the ADCA. If you look at the total jurisdictional funding for this fund is $26.7 million, and from the central conferences is $1.6 million. And if we go to the next slide, this kind of shows you some of the breakdown of what's changing within general administration. GCFA is receiving nearly a 60% decrease in funding for a total funding of $6.8 million. The General Commission on Archives and History would receive almost a 10% reduction for a total of $3.7 million. General Conference is actually budgeted for an increase of 15%, and this is due to budgeting for a 2026 special called session of General Conference. So their total budget proposed is $13.6 million. The Judicial Council is looking at a reduction of almost 44% for total funding in the upcoming quadrennium of $330,000. And the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters would see a decrease of 5.6%. And again, this is the same chart. It shows both the General Administration Fund in total and by its components. Again, you see all the line items are decreasing, some significantly. Again, GCFA is almost 60% reduction. Then you see the general conference is the only line item that is increasing. And this is just basically the same information as the previous chart. It shows a little bit extra. It shows the Episcopal Fund, and we'll talk more about that later. Let's move on to the next slide. The Interdenominational Cooperation Fund. This fund, it supports the ecumenical work of the United Methodist Church. This fund is overseen by the Council of Bishops. GCFA is recommending a significant decrease to this fund of 72%. And the reason for this is they have accumulated about $6 million of reserves over the past several quadrennium. However, these funds they're restricted for specific purposes, which has caused some of these dollars to accumulate because they can't be used for other purposes. And so GCFA is asking in its report number 7 that this fund also have all of the current funds within the Interdenominational Cooperation Fund become unrestricted, and so that they can be disseminated and help still support this fund while it sees this decrease over the next 4 years. Again, you see the figures. The 2017 to 2020 approved budget was $8.2 million, and the currently proposed budget is $2,265,000. The Ministerial Education Fund. This fund, it supports United Methodist seminaries and clergy development within the U.S. This fund is also being recommended for a 48% decrease. The total funding would be $54.74 million. One point of note is that 25% of these funds are retained by the annual conferences in the U.S. For their use. And in terms of dollars, you see the 2017 to 2020 approved budget in column A was almost $105 million. If you look at column D, what we're currently recommending, it's nearly half that at $54.7 million. The World Service Fund. So many people think about the general agencies of the church. Well, this is where most of the general church agencies are funded, is inside the World Service Fund, and it supports the diversity of mission across the general agencies, and it's overseen by the connectional table. This fund is currently seeing a recommended reduction of 49%, again, almost half from where we were. Total funds are $154.5 million. In this current quadrennium that's being proposed, the connectional table has prioritized certain groups to be fixed charges. These groups, what this means is those groups that are called fixed charges will receive full funding before those agencies and funds that are on ratio will receive any funding. So they will essentially have a collection rate of 100%, and they will get their funds before any of the on ratio agencies and funds receive their money. What does on ratio mean? On ratio means receiving money on a pro rata basis after the fixed charges are paid. And these entities, so they receive what's left over. The ones that are receiving monies as fixed charges in the proposed budget are the connectional table, which has historically been a fixed charge organization. However, these next organizations were typically on ratio, but are now being categorized as fixed charges, which are the General Commission on Religion and Race, the General Commission on the Status of All Women, and the National Ethnic Plans that we have. So these entities referenced above are receiving less than a 1% decrease in funding. And you also have United Methodist Communications that is a fixed charge, but it is receiving a 47% decline in funding. So again, the connectional table has prioritized these groups as far as from a missional perspective, and they're trying to protect their overall funding because many of these organizations are also very small, and a significant decline in funding would essentially render them ineffective. So what funds are on ratio within World Service? The Central Conference Theological Education Fund, which is being proposed for a 50% decline. The Young Clergy Initiative is not slated for any funding as the initiative is complete. It was slated for the 3 quadrennium, and it has met that 12-year period. And so the connectional table has recommended that this funding be ended. United Methodist Men is receiving a 41% reduction, and the contingency fund is receiving a 50% reduction from past quadrennium. So the contingency fund is used for needs that arise during a quadrennium that were not planned for. And the remaining allocations on an on-ratio basis go to the general boards of Church and Society, Global Ministries, Higher Education and Ministry, and United Methodist Communications. Combined, these church agencies are recommended for a 53% reduction. So again, most of the agencies and funds within World Service and within the other funds are receiving almost a 50% reduction. And this chart just puts into numbers what we described. I believe you'll get these charts. I won't go through all the numbers, but you'll have these to review.
Then we look at the Episcopal Fund. We support the Episcopal Fund, the Episcopal leadership of the United Methodist Church. The Episcopal Fund is being recommended for a 15.2% decrease from the 2017 to 2020 quadrennium. This is an increase of 13.4% from what was published in the ADCA. So the total Episcopal Fund would be around $78 million, and the Central Conference Episcopal Fund apportionment for the coming quadrennium would be around $4.6 million. So I wanted to explain this little to you on this particular slide. The Council of Bishops requested an additional $15 million to fund the Episcopal Fund for the period 2025 to 2038 budget quadrennium. This was accomplished in 2 ways. The first one, GCFA agreed to recommend an increase to the base percentage in the apportionment formula to fund $7.5 million. That's half of the $15 million. Then the other half, the next way we did was GCFA agreed to recommend a reduction in budget allocations to the agencies which receive benefit trust by another $7.5 million. How do they get the $7.5 million for the benefit trust? West Path has a legislation which will be put additional monies into the benefit trust from a fund with no remaining beneficiaries. Therefore, GCFA would increase the benefit trust distribution by $7.5 million to the agencies receiving budget allocation. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the benefit trust. The benefit trust was established in 1996 as a fund used by general church agencies like Global Ministries, Church and Society, COSRO, GCOR, Archives and Ministry, all of those agencies to cover employer costs related to active and retiree benefit. As these costs can be unpredictable, these dollars were set aside to make sure that the agencies could guarantee their obligation to employees for their benefits. The next slide you will see is a summary of the chart. Just saying that column A, you would see the approved budget in 2017 to 2020, $92 million. And the ADC that you have, it's about $68 million or $69 million with a reduction of 25%. However, as I told you before, the bishop requested additional $15 million to put into the Episcopal Fund. So the revised 25 to 28, 2025 to 2028 budget for the Episcopal Fund, it's about $78 million with a reduction of 15% when compared to the previous quadrennium.
So I think with that presentation, we are able to move into our questions portion.
To clarify a couple questions that we have seen in the chat, everyone who is registered for this webinar will be receiving a copy of the information to go over at their leisure.
We also have a question in the chat about, is there additional Episcopal areas in Africa? So if somebody could speak to that number, please.
I will start, and Rick, you want to add, it'll be fine. The number of bishops in Africa and worldwide is about 20 bishops. In Africa, last quadrennium, it was recommended, approved, additional 5 bishops. And the budget includes the 5 additional bishops. However, the funding would not be available for the entire 5 bishops because it will run into deficit if we fund all of the bishops that has been approved at the General Conference in 2016, which is about 71 bishops. So we will run into deficit around 2026 or 2027. So that the funding level is very limited to fund the additional Episcopal areas in Africa. But that has to be seen because GCFA has no right to tell the number of bishops. But the General Conference and the delegates, everybody has to make the decision based on the financial reality. They need to decide how much they can afford to have in Africa. Rick, you want to add anything, Rick?
No, I think you handled it well, Moses.
Thank you.
Okay, looking at the chat, I see a question on how this budget, and I'm assuming this means this newest proposed budget, will affect African bishops. So more of a question about, I'm assuming, current African bishops instead of talking about additional African bishops.
As I explained before, the funding level to fund the bishops worldwide has reduced significantly, about 15.2%. With that reduction, it's very difficult to fund the entire worldwide number of bishops. So the delegates had to make the right choice to find out how much bishops they will be able to elect in Africa, Europe, and Philippines. So the budget in Africa itself, if we fund the entire number of bishops as recommended, it will run at deficit. And we will not be able to fund at the same level that we are funding now. So the budget that we have can support only a reduced number of bishops in Africa. But if we go ahead and have the full number of bishops, it's going to be very difficult to fund it. If you go ahead and elect the entire 5 new bishops, it'll be forced on GCFA to reduce either their salary, their housing allowance, or office allowance. Since we cannot determine, GCFA has no authority to determine the number of bishops, we will still go ahead and budget that, but we will not be able to fund them at the full level.
And Moses, I think it's helpful to point out that this budget is also requiring a reduction in the number of bishops in the United States as well.
Yeah.
So it's affected across, everywhere. We also have another question from French, which is, with this financial disruption, will the support of youth scholarships at Africa University also be disrupted? So will youth scholarships at Africa University be disrupted?
Moses, can I attempt to answer this question?
Yeah, go ahead.
The funding that is supplied by apportionments in the U.S. To Africa University primarily goes to support the office and functions of Africa University in the United States, which is the fundraising arm of Africa University for the most part. So it won't directly affect The scholarships, also understanding that African University has nearly $100 million of endowments that it also uses for funding. So this should not significantly impact the overall operations and scholarships for African University going forward.
Great. Thank you for that. We have another question. Can you suggest to the delegates what is possible so there will be no deficit?
As I told you before, GCFA has no authority to recommend the number of bishops. However, looking at the financial reality, it is very difficult to fund the additional 5 new bishops that has been approved during the 2016 General Conference. Even with the number of 20 bishops worldwide, it's very difficult to fund the bishops at the current level. Even now, we fund the Episcopal Fund, the Synod conferences, up to 90% funding comes from the US. As Rick told before, this over 30% reduction in the number of churches that has left. What that means is there's been significant reduction in the income that we will be receiving from the local churches during the quadrennium 2025 to 2038. So it's going to be very difficult to fund the entire number of bishops that's been approved.
How these changes will affect the Nordic Baltic Episcopal area?
We didn't answer that question. Rick, you want to, anything you want to say?
I think, as of now, obviously the Episcopal Fund is one as a whole. So I think we don't really look at, when we're looking at the Episcopal Fund at this point, we're looking at a reduction in funding. And so I think the effects of how many Episcopal areas are elected in both the United States and in the other central conferences will impact the level of funding that is available for each Episcopal area. So what will be the impact on the Nordic Baltic region, I can't say for sure, but obviously the more bishops that are elected, then the less funding there will be for each Episcopal area around the world.
There is one more. Will the finances be affected positively or negatively with the disaffiliation? And I think one of the major messages from this presentation has been that disaffiliation in the United States is one of the major drivers of the need to submit this decreased budget. So it is having some negative effects, but we are faithful in the Lord that He will provide. What percentage of this proposed budget goes to the agencies for ministries?
So the general agencies, again, are primarily part of World Service, with the exception of GCFA and the Commission on Archives and History. When you add the funding for all those groups together, it's about 42% of the budget. About 25% of the budget is going towards the Episcopal Fund. So you're looking at, between 23%, but between those two areas, that's about 2/3 of the budget, with the rest, significant portion going to ministerial education, the Black College Fund, and African University being the next largest components, as well as the Central Conference Theological Education Fund.
Thank you, Rick. We did have another question from Josephine Acombo, and the question is, will the reduction affect all African bishops equally? Because the Episcopal regions of Africa do not have the same size. So I think it's a question of how will the Episcopal fund reductions affect the bishops, given that they have different sized areas? Will they be equal, or is that a general conference decision?
Brandy, that's a good question from this person, but we do not have. The answer would be there are two or three areas that need to be looked into. One is the Standing Committee of Central Conference. That's a committee that will be reviewing all of the bishops in central conferences. So that's a committee that will be looking into, particularly in Africa, Europe, and Philippines. So that's one committee that will be looking into it, not GCFA. The next one is the delegates themselves to make the choice. And between they need to make the decision where it's mostly, where the number of bishops, more bishops are needed, missionally need to be decided by the delegates and finally approved by the General Conference. So these are the three steps that can happen, possibly.
How will our finances be further affected by possible decisions in the coming General Conference?
Can you explain the question a little more, Ms. Gloria?
We are aware that very important decision will be made in the coming General Conference. Maybe I don't know the details, but we worry about decisions that will be made, and it's very possible that it will further affect our finances.
Okay.
That's a good question, Ms. Gloria. There other decisions could be made, and which might increase the budget. But is it sustainable? Will that be able to do that? So during the General Conference, GCFA, in consultation with the connectional table, if it is the program side of it, will try to decide how we will be able to adjust the budget to meet the important decisions that we made at the General Conference. As I told you before, the financial reality is that the funding level is significantly reduced. So the delegates are making the decision, have to make the correct decision in order to able to be within the budget level that we have. The reality is also this. If we increase the budget, the bottom line budget, it will affect the conferences and local churches in the U.S. And they do not have that capacity to pay the increased level of apportionment. So the delegates during the General Conference, have to make the right choice, how we can help not to increase the budget, but how we can meet all the missional needs within the budget level that we have proposing.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to ask my question. I see if we can follow what is happening or what has happened in America, that's where disaffiliations happened. But in Africa, we have not heard of disaffiliation. The church is actually growing, and it grew, which then warranted the number of bishops to be increased. Now, if we are then going to be constrained by the budget to the extent of not allowing extra bishops, when this situation demands extra bishops, what are we doing as church, and are we saying to that? Because honestly, money should come from somewhere in order to increase the number of bishops in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I'm glad that you asked that question. My answer is this. That's the reality that you're having it. But the reality is that the funding to the Africa bishops comes from the U.S., almost up to the level of 90%. The funding that is supporting the Episcopal Fund from the Central Conferences is less than 10%. If you look at that, the 19% is coming from the jurisdiction from the U.S. The funding level is reducing in USA. So what that means is that the money that is coming in order to fund the Episcopal areas in Africa is reducing. So that's the financial reality we are facing. It's not that we do not want to fund it, but we are constrained, not able to fund it because the money that we potentially will be receiving is significantly reducing in the USA. It's not that we don't want to fund all the bishops that has been approved. We want to do that, but unfortunately, we're not able to do it because the money that's going to be received potentially from the local churches is going to be reduced. As Brandy reminded that, the reduction is not only in Africa, it's going to affect worldwide, which includes the bishops in the U.S. also, the number of bishops in the U.S. Even in the jurisdictions, they will not be able to fund the entire approved budget as of now. If they do that, they will run into deficit. So the problem is not just in Africa, Europe, or Philippines. The problem is still in the U.S. That's mainly because the funding that we're going to receive from the local churches are going to be potentially lower than what we will be receiving now.
I wanted to let everyone know that there will be an opportunity at General Conference for Central Conference members to receive a budget update again. That is going to take place on April 20th, and it should be in your schedule from General Conference. So this is not your only opportunity to review this budget and ask questions. Rick, perhaps you or I could take this question as we wait for Moses. In which ways can the African Episcopal areas increase their contributions to the entire church?
I think the way to do that is the primary way to do that would be through your annual conference treasurers. They can submit the funds to GCFA. We can arrange for that, those funds to be sent. You just need to contact our office. You can contact myself or Dana Choki in the Episcopal Services Department. But we'd be happy to, work with you to make that happen.
And I would just add that every dollar makes a difference in terms of our work we do in making disciples. It doesn't have to be a big contribution or a small contribution. I think we as a connection, our bishops and our members are grateful anytime we receive any support. If you all have any further questions, we are very blessed to have a Central Conferences manager whose name's Nizulo Tweche. And Nizulo, if you just want to introduce yourself and let them know, about you being a resource and your contact information.
Yes, of course, Brandy. Thank you for giving me the floor. It's a great pleasure to be with each and every one of you here. And my role at GCFA is that I'm the Connectional Relations Manager for Central Conferences, like the bridge between GCFA and the Central Conferences. I help our churches, annual conferences, districts, United Methodist related organizations connect with us at GCFA and hopefully see how we can be of help to their organization and to support their ministry. Support their ministry in a way that we will see significant increase in resources available to fund the process of making disciples of Jesus Christ. This is one of our major goals at GCFA. We are passionate about seeing the church making disciples of Jesus Christ. So, yeah, my contact information is right there. My email, WhatsApp, feel free to send your questions you may have concerning GCFA and the services we offer. Talking about services, here we just talked about what we generally call the disciplinary functions of GCFA. Budgeting, because the Book of Discipline enables us, authorizes us to look at that. But beyond that, as a finance and administration agency, we are blessed to have talented staff in various disciplines. And we've set aside, since a couple of years back, this a service, a brand called UMC Support. UMC Support is the way for us at GCFA to empower your ministry, support your ministry so that you are able to achieve your goals of making disciples of Jesus Christ. So is it a website you need? Is it an HR policy you need to establish? Is it IT services or installing a brand new network at your annual conference office? You can reach out to us and we'll have conversations to see how you should be able to spend the next process to achieve those goals. Thank you again, Brandy. I'm available. My communication channels are open. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazulo. And again, Nazulo will be on hand at General Conference, as will many of us at GCFA, to help provide important financial and budget information to the delegates. We want to be a resource for you, as we know that there are tough decisions coming. And to that end, we want to thank you all for your time today, and a very, very big thank you for your time in service to our church, and giving of your time at General Conference as well. We will be sending out these slides and recording. So if you want to come back and view it, didn't understand, had further questions, those resources will be made available. These slides will also be available at our website, which is www.gcfa.org. So thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you all next month.